In the harshest blizzard of the Wyoming winter, a worn-out former Navy SEAL drove through a wall of white, unaware he was seconds away from a moment that would change the rest of his life. Standing on the frozen roadside was a young widow clutching her infant, two trembling children pressed behind her, the cold already stealing their breath. He slammed the brakes. His K9 leapt forward, barking urgently, and in that split second, between life and death, between passing by or stopping, began a story no viewer could turn away from. State. The highway looked less like a road and more like a white river swallowing the world. Snow blew sideways across the asphalt, erasing the painted lines, smothering the shoulders, turning the Wyoming night into a tunnel of moving glass. Jack Mercer leaned forward over the steering wheel, eyes narrowed, jaw tight, listening to the wipers scrape a rhythm he was already tired of. The old pickup groaned as the wind slammed into its side. Headlights cut only a short cone through the storm, catching flakes that flashed and vanished like sparks. Somewhere behind him, miles back, there had been a gas station with a flickering open sign and a bored kid behind the register. Ahead, there was nothing but darkness and trees and the cabin that waited for him like an unfinished sentence. Coda lay in the passenger seat, a big German shepherd with a thick sable coat and dark muzzle dusted in gray. He was half asleep, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes slitted. Every time the truck hit a patch of ice and shifted, Coda's ears twitched, but he stayed calm. He trusted Jack's hands on the wheel more than most people would have. Jack's fingers were calloused where they wrapped the steering wheel, knuckles pale in the dash light. A faint scar traced along his right wrist, disappearing under the cuff of his jacket. He ignored the ache in his shoulders, the way the storm pressed against the glass like a living thing. Nights like this were familiar. Sandstorms, snowstorms. Didn't make much difference. Limited visibility. Unpredictable ground. You slowed down, watched your angles, kept moving. A gust hit hard from the left, shoving the truck toward the shoulder. Jack eased the wheel, bringing it back, feeling the tires search for grip. A little farther down, the land dropped into a shallow ravine. He knew this stretch. He'd driven it too many times in the last few years, back and forth between the cabin and the little town of Redwood Falls. It wasn't a place most people would choose, but he hadn't picked it for the scenery. "Almost there, buddy," he said quietly. Coda's tail thumped once against the seat, a lazy, trusting sound. The radio was off. It usually was. Jack preferred the noise of the road to other people's voices. Tonight all he heard was the engine, the tires hiss over snow, the hollow roar of the wind moving over metal. The clock on the dash blinked past midnight. Too late to be out. Here. Too cold. Any fool with sense was home, doors shut, heat turned up, waiting the storm out. Coda lifted his head. It happened fast. 1 second he was half asleep. The next his ears shot forward, his whole body tense. A low growl rolled out of his chest, not the playful rumble he gave when he wanted attention, but the deep warning that said something out there was wrong. Jack didn't argue with that sound. His boot came off the gas automatically. The truck slowed, engine dropping into a steady hum. He peered ahead, but there was only white, swirling and shifting. "What is it?" he murmured. Coda moved closer to the windshield, nails clicking on the dash, nose almost pressed to the glass. The growl sharpened. Then he barked once, a sharp, explosive sound that filled the cab. The headlights swept around a bend, cutting across the edge of the road. Jack saw them. At first he thought it was a drift of snow piled oddly high at the shoulder. A dark shape, huddled, bent against the wind. Then it moved, staggered, and separated into more than one shape. His heart kicked hard in his chest. He slammed the brakes. The truck skated sideways for a breathless second before the tires caught. The seat belt dug into his shoulder. Coda braced his paws, riding the slide like he'd done it 100 times, which he had. The shapes ahead resolved into people. One adult. Small figures clustered around her legs, clinging like shadows. "Jesus," Jack whispered. He brought the truck to a stop a few yards away, hazards flashing red against the whiteout. For a moment, he just sat there, staring through the windshield. The woman stood in the blizzard, body hunched over something held tight to her chest. Behind her, two children, thin coats flapping, faces nearly lost behind scarves and snow. Nobody should have been out here, not tonight, not dressed like that. Coda whined, impatient, pushing his nose toward the glass. "I see 'em," Jack said. His voice came out low and steady, but something in his chest had already tightened in that old, familiar way. The part of him that had been trained to move toward danger, not away from it, woke up like it had just been sleeping lightly. He shoved the gear into park, grabbed his gloves, and opened the door. The storm punched into him, cold air slicing through his layers, stealing his breath. Snow stung his face. For a second his vision blurred white, then cleared. "Stay," he told Coda. Coda didn't move, but his eyes followed every step Jack took. Jack trudged through the snow, boots sinking almost to the ankle. Wind tore at his jacket, flung icy needles against his cheeks. The woman turned when she heard him, twisting her body so her own back took the brunt of the wind, the bundle in her arms shielded by her coat. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s. Dark hair plastered to her face, cheeks raw from the cold. Her eyes, when they locked on him, were wide and hard at the same time. The eyes of someone who'd been pushed past fear into a place beyond it. "Ma'am," Jack called, raising his gloved hands where she could see them. "You can't be out here. You and the kids need to get in the truck." "Stay back," she shouted over the wind. Her voice was hoarse, but there was steel in it. The little boy at her side, maybe 7 or 8, clutched her coat with both hands. A girl a little older stood on her other side, arm wrapped protectively around her younger brother, teeth chattering, legs shaking under jeans stiff with ice. The bundle in the woman's arms shifted, and a thin, reedy cry cut through the blizzard. A baby. Jack's stomach dropped. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said. The words came automatically, the same tone he'd used in villages half a world away, talking to people who had every reason not to trust the man in front of them. "My truck's heated. It's not far. You stay out here. You're not going to make it through the hour." The woman's lips were bluish, but they pressed together stubbornly. She adjusted her grip on the baby with trembling hands. Snow had gathered in her lashes, turning them white at the tips. "We're fine," she said, which was the most obvious lie he'd heard in a long time. "Ma'am," Jack repeated, slower this time, pitching his voice down into something solid, something that could cut through panic. "Look at your kids." The little boy's knees were knocking. The girl's fingers looked red and swollen, wrapped around her brother's shoulders. The baby's cry had grown weaker, thinner. The wind took the sound and shredded it. "Frostbite doesn't give you a second chance," Jack said. "Hypothermia doesn't care how tough you are. You know that." Her eyes flicked to the boy, then the girl. A shudder ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you alive," he said simply. "All of you." Snow swirled between them, filling the silence. Jack didn't move closer. He held his ground, hands still up, letting her see every inch of him. The worn jacket, the knit cap pulled low, the tired face, the man who looked like he'd been out in bad weather before and didn't scare easy. Behind him the truck idled, exhaust steaming into the air. Through the windshield, Coda's head was visible, ears pricked, a dark silhouette watching. "That's my dog," Jack added, jerking his chin toward the truck. "Coda, trained. He's not going to hurt your kids. He's better behaved than most people I know." The girl's eyes shifted to the truck, to the dog. For a moment they brightened, just a touch. Kids were funny that way. They might not trust strangers, but a dog was a different story. Coda lifted a paw against the glass as if he'd understood his name. "How far?" the woman asked finally. Her voice was thinner now, each word drawn through effort. 10 minutes, Jack said. "Cabin's got heat. Blankets, food. After that, we can figure out what you need. But right now, you need to get out of this storm." She stood there, breathing hard, snow collecting on her shoulders, weighing her down. He could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride, fear, instinct, all pulling in different directions. He'd seen that look too many times. People who had nothing left to trust but themselves, and even that had been shaken. The boy coughed, a rough, rattling sound that bent him forward. The girl pulled him closer, her own body shuddering. The woman closed her eyes for a heartbeat. "Kids," she said, voice fraying at the edges, "we're getting in the truck." The girl hesitated. "Mom?" "Now, Lily," she said with a firmness Jack recognized. A mother's tone even when everything else had fallen apart. "Take Sam's hand. Stay close." She shifted the baby higher against her chest and took a step toward Jack. Then another. She didn't lower her guard, but she moved. That was enough. Jack nodded once, a small gesture of respect, and turned, breaking a path through the snow back to the truck. He opened the passenger door wide, and the warmth spilling out felt like stepping into another world. "Kids first," he said. The girl guided her brother up into the cab, helping him climb onto the bench seat. Coda backed up, making room without complaint, tail thumping gently. The boy's eyes went wide as the big dog sniffed his sleeve, then settled with a little huff. "He's warm," the boy whispered, awed. "Told you," Jack said. The girl slid in next, pressing close to her brother. The woman came last, still clutching the baby, pausing just long enough to glance over her shoulder into the darkness, as if expecting something to come out of it and drag her back. Jack saw that look too. "Get in," he said quietly. "Door closes, storm stays out there. That's the deal." She climbed up into the truck, careful not to bump the baby's head on the frame. Jack shut the door behind her, sealing them all inside the small, crowded cab. For a moment, the only sounds were the heater whirring, the engine rumbling, the faint whimper of the baby against his mother's chest. Jack circled around, climbed behind the wheel, and put the truck into gear. Snow crunched under the tires as they pulled away from the shoulder, swallowed again by the blizzard. He glanced sideways. The woman stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, one hand cradling the baby, the other braced against the dash. Her shoulders shook with tiny tremors she was trying to hide. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Emily," she said finally. "Emily Carter." "Jack Mercer," he replied. "This is Coda. You're safe in here, Emily." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and wary. She looked at his hands on the wheel, the scars, the steadiness. Then she looked back at the road, at the endless white. Her voice dropped, too low for the kids to hear. "If you try to hurt my children," she said, every word clear and biting in the warm cab, "I will walk back into that storm with them before I let that happen." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel for a second. He nodded once, not offended, not surprised. "Fair enough," he said. "Then I guess we both have a reason to make sure we all get through this night." The truck rolled deeper into the blizzard, carrying 5 strangers and 1 tired dog toward a cabin that had never held so many living hearts at once. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something fragile and uneasy had just begun, a thin, flickering line between trust and survival, drawn in the space of a single, desperate ride. The road narrowed into a single dark ribbon cutting through the pines, branches bending under the weight of fresh snow. The storm still chased them, hammering at the truck's sides, but the cab was warm now, fogging faintly with breath. Emily sat rigid beside the door, one arm wrapped around the baby, the other braced tight against her thigh. Her shoulders twitched every time the wind hit. The two older kids sat pressed together between her and Coda, their small bodies leaning toward the heat of the dog like plants bending toward sunlight. Jack kept the truck steady, navigating by memory more than sight. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind them, but there was nothing except a curtain of swirling white. He didn't know anything about this woman or who she might be running from, but he knew the look in her eyes. People didn't wander into storms like this unless something worse was on the other side of the door. They fled. "We're a few minutes out," he said, raising his voice just enough to carry over the heater. Emily didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed fixed on the baby's face, checking the color, brushing stray snowflakes from the boy's cheek. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, careful. "Thank you?" Jack nodded once. He didn't say, "You're welcome." Gratitude made him uncomfortable. It always had. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He had just seen 5 human beings freezing to death on the side of the road. Anyone with a pulse should have done the same. Coda shifted, nosing gently at the younger boy, Sam, who had stopped shivering but still looked dazed, eyelids heavy. The dog gave a soft chuff, then settled again. The girl, Lily, tentatively laid a hand on his thick fur. Coda didn't so much as twitch, except to lift his head ever so slightly, offering her a place to rest her fingers. For the first time since they'd found her, Lily's mouth softened at the corners. Not quite a smile, but close. Jack pulled the truck into the narrow path that led to his property. The tires crunched over frozen earth as the trees drew close, their branches forming a dark arch overhead. Then the cabin appeared, a modest structure of weathered logs and stone, its porch light glowing warm. Through the storm, the chimney puffing thin trails of smoke into the air. "Coda," Jack said, giving the dog a soft tap on the shoulder. "Home?" Coda's tail swept slowly across the seat, a solemn acknowledgement. When Jack parked, the wind punched hard enough to rock the truck. He turned to Emily. "I'll get the kids inside first. Less time they're exposed, the better." Emily stiffened instantly. "No, I'll take them. You lead the way." Jack held her stare a moment, weighing her fear. She wasn't fighting him out of pride. She was terrified of letting her children leave her reach for even a second. He nodded. "Okay, follow me close." He opened his door, bracing against the cold, then circled to the passenger side and swung it open. The storm lunged in like a living thing, grabbing hair, clothes, breaths. Sam flinched and whimpered, clutching his mother's sleeve. Lily wrapped her arm around her brother, small face set, with a determination that looked too old on her. Jack stepped back just far enough to give them room. Emily climbed out with the baby held tight, her coat straining against the wind. Lily and Sam followed, their boots sinking into the snow nearly to their ankles. "Right behind me," Jack said, and led them up the path toward the cabin. The porch light cast a golden halo that cut through the worst of the storm. Jack pushed open the front door, and the warm breath of the cabin rolled out to meet them. The smell of wood smoke and pine hit him first, familiar and grounding. "Get inside," he said, holding the door wide. Emily ushered the kids through. Lily immediately guided Sam toward the hearth, their silhouettes small against the flicker of firelight. Emily stepped in last, shoulders hunched around the baby. Once they were in, Jack shut the door firmly and latched it. The transformation was instant. The howling wind faded to a distant rush. The fire snapped softly, spreading heat through the room. Coda trotted in behind them, shook snow from his coat, and took up a quiet post near the kids as though he'd been assigned to them. Jack peeled off his gloves and hung his coat on the peg by the door. The cabin interior was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace at the center, a long wooden table, mismatched chairs, a sofa with a patched blanket thrown over it, and shelves lined with old tools and a handful of books. It wasn't much, but it was safe. "Sit by the fire," Jack said. "I'll get blankets." Emily hesitated only a moment before guiding the kids closer. She knelt on the rug and shifted the baby so his face was angled toward the warmth. Lily helped pull off her brother's wet gloves, her small hands shaking from cold or worry. Maybe both. Jack returned with thick wool blankets, handing one to each child and one to Emily. When he offered the last, she reached for it, and her sleeve slipped back, just enough for Jack to see it again. A bruise, faint, yellowing at the edges. Not from the cold, not from a fall. He didn't comment. He didn't look at her differently or stare longer than necessary. But something tightened behind his ribs, an old familiar tension, the kind that came from reading danger in the room before anyone else could. "Let me check the baby," he said quietly. "If you're okay with that." Emily clutched the infant closer. "I can do it." "I'm not touching him. I just need to know if he's warm enough." Her eyes flicked to Coda, then back to Jack. She exhaled, a thin, shaky breath, and loosened the blanket just enough for him to see the baby's face. Pale, but breathing steady, lips no longer blue. "He'll be okay," Jack said. "Just keep him close to the fire. You too." Emily pulled the baby back to her chest and nodded. Jack moved to the kitchen area and stirred the pot of soup he'd left simmering before the storm drove him out earlier that evening. He ladled some into a bowl and brought it to Sam first. The boy stared at it, unsure, then looked at his mother. When she nodded, he took a small sip. A moment later, he devoured it like he hadn't eaten in days. Lily accepted her bowl with quiet politeness. Emily took hers last, murmuring something soft he couldn't make out. The heat in the room finally began sinking into their bones. Lily's cheeks flushed pink. Sam leaned drowsily against Coda, who allowed the weight without complaint, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Emily stared into the fire, her jaw working slightly, as though she were chewing on thoughts she didn't want to swallow. The baby slept now, tiny breaths fogging the blanket. Jack stood by the table, giving them space while still keeping a watchful eye. He'd brought strangers into his home before, lost hikers, folks caught in storms, but none like this. None that made him wonder what had chased them out into the cold. He noticed Emily's hands then, small, chapped from wind, the knuckles red and rough. But it was the way they trembled when she thought no one was watching that held him. She wasn't just cold. She was frightened, and not of him. "Eat as much as you need," Jack said, keeping his voice low, steady. "You're safe here tonight." Emily looked up, eyes reflecting the firelight. She didn't thank him this time. Instead, she gave a tiny nod, one that said she believed him only enough to get through the moment. The storm rattled against the windows. Coda lifted his head and listened, then lay it back down. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt the cabin holding more than silence. It held breath. Life? Fragile and shaken, but alive. And as he watched the kids curled against the blankets, Emily staring into the flames, with the weight of the world behind her eyes, he knew the night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something he hadn't invited. Something that was already unfolding inside his home, settling into the cracks of his quiet life like drifting snow. Soft and relentless. When the last log snapped in the fireplace, Emily finally spoke. "You don't know us," she whispered. "You shouldn't have stopped." Jack met her gaze. "Ma'am, I've walked past enough people in storms, real storms and the other kind. I'm not starting again." She held his eyes for a long moment before looking away, her fingers brushing the bruise on her wrist as if reminding herself of something. Outside, the wind screamed across the trees, but inside the cabin the fire held steady, warming 5 strangers and a dog who watched them all with patient, loyal eyes. And the night stretched on, carrying them toward a truth none of them were ready to speak yet. Praidting. By the time the clock on the old mantel crept past midnight, the cabin had slipped into a soft, exhausted quiet. The storm outside still pressed against the walls, but its roar had turned into a distant, steady hum. Inside, the fire in the stone hearth burned low and deep, casting a warm orange glow over everything it touched. Lily and Sam lay curled up together on the rug, wrapped in thick blankets Jack had dragged out of the cedar chest. At some point, Lily's hand had found its way into Coda's fur, fingers buried just behind his ear. The big dog lay still as a statue, eyes half closed, as if he knew any sudden movement would break whatever little piece the children had managed to steal from the day. Emily sat with her back against the wall near the hearth, knees drawn up, the baby tucked beneath her open coat. Noah's small face was just visible above the edge of the blanket, lips parted in sleep, cheeks finely pink instead of frighteningly pale. Every now and then, Emily would bend and press her lips to his forehead, as if to convince herself he was still there, still warm. Jack sat in the old armchair opposite the fire, elbows on his knees, a mug of coffee cooling between his hands. He wasn't tired, not the way normal people got tired. Years of working nights, of listening for sounds other men slept through, had rewired something in him. His body could be worn out, but his mind stayed on watch. It watched now. He didn't stare at Emily. He'd learned long ago that some people needed space more than they needed questions. But he saw more than enough in the small details. The way she flinched a little at every sudden pop from the fire. The way her fingers worried at the edge of the blanket around Noah, as if they needed something to hold that wasn't fear. "Kids are tough," he said at last, keeping his voice low, careful not to wake the little ones. "Stronger than we give them credit for." Emily didn't look up. "They shouldn't have to be," she murmured. Jack let the silence sit a while. He took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm and stared into the coals. He knew this dance. People who'd been through too much didn't come out with their story neat and ready. Sometimes you had to wait until their own thoughts ran too loud for them to keep to themselves. "How long were you walking out there?" he asked quietly. Her eyes lifted to his, dark and tired. "Long enough," she said. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere far below her ribs. "Too long." She rested the back of her head against the wall and looked toward Lily and Sam. "We almost didn't see your headlights. Snow was blowing so hard it felt like the whole world was just white noise." "That road isn't exactly busy this time of night," Jack said. "You were counting on somebody coming?" "No." Her mouth twitched, humorless. "I wasn't counting on anyone. I just knew I couldn't stay." The words hung there, heavier than anything the storm had thrown at the cabin. Jack glanced at the bruise still faintly visible on her wrist, at the way she unconsciously tucked it under the blanket when she saw where his eyes had gone. He exhaled slowly. "You running from a man?" he asked. It wasn't prying, just a simple question from a man who'd seen enough to know the shape of certain stories. Her jaw tightened. "You could say that." He didn't push. He waited. "My husband Ben was a firefighter," she said finally, eyes fixed on the flames. "He used to come home smelling like smoke and soap. I used to complain about the soot on his boots." A small, sad smile touched her lips for just a second. "Funny what you miss." "Firefighter," Jack repeated, nodding a little. "Takes a certain kind of courage." "It took him," she said softly. House fire outside Cheyenne. There were kids inside. He went in. Her fingers tightened on the baby's blanket. He didn't come out. Jack's hands tightened around his mug. He didn't say he was sorry. She'd heard that already, probably more times than she could count. Words like that bounced off certain kinds of grief. "After that," Emily continued, "we moved in with his older brother Mark. He said it was only until I got back on my feet. Said he'd help me with the kids. Said family sticks together. Her eyes darkened. Turns out he was only half right. What changed? Jack asked. Nothing at first, she said. He was decent, quiet, helped fix the car, watched the kids when I went to the grocery store. Then time went by. I wasn't getting back on my feet fast enough. Money was tight. Grief turned into impatience. Impatience turned into anger. She paused. Anger needed somewhere to land. She lifted her arm and pushed the sleeve back deliberately this time, revealing the bruise in full. Older ones ghosted along her forearm, fading but still there if you knew what to look for. The first time he apologized, she said. Swore it would never happen again. Said he'd been drinking. Said he just lost it. Her voice went flat. Second time, he said I made him do it. Third time, he didn't bother explaining. Jack listened, still as stone. The part of him that had been trained to assess threats took notes quietly in the back of his mind. Pattern, escalation, risk. The rest of him just felt something cold and hard settle where his patience should have been. He started keeping things in his name, Emily went on. Bank account, car, even the kids' medical cards. Said it was easier that way, said he could handle things. If I wanted to buy groceries, I had to ask. If I wanted to take Lily to the doctor, I had to ask. If I wanted to breathe without his permission, she shook her head. Well, you get the idea. Yeah, Jack said. I do. She shifted, pulling Noah a little closer. The baby sighed in his sleep and nuzzled against her. Something in her expression softened. He told me no judge was ever going to give a broke widow full custody, she said. Said I'd never make it on my own. Said if I tried to leave, he'd take the kids, and I'd be lucky to see them on holidays. Maybe? The fire cracked, sending up a small shower of sparks. Lily murmured something in her sleep and rolled closer to Coda. The dog stayed put, only his eyes moving, tracking the sound. So you left anyway, Jack said. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I took what cash I had hidden in a coffee tin, grabbed the kids' coats, and waited till he passed out in his recliner. Her gaze slid to the window, to the darkness beyond. I didn't think the storm would get so bad so fast. I saw a chance, and I took it. There are worse things than a blizzard, Jack said quietly. Emily's eyes met his. There it was again, that flicker of understanding between two people who had been through different hells and come out with the same kind of scars. What about you? She asked suddenly. You talk like somebody who's seen worse? Jack almost smiled, but it didn't quite make it to his mouth. He'd learned to live with his ghosts by not feeding them with words. But tonight, in this small cabin filled with sleeping children and one bone-tired woman, it felt wrong to sit there like he was made of stone while she laid her life open on the floor. I was in the Navy, he said. SEAL team. Spent more years overseas than I did stateside for a while there. She studied him, taking in the set of his shoulders, the way he watched the room. That explains the dog, she said. Got him after my last deployment, Jack replied. Coda was trained for work most people don't want to think about. We both aged out of it, I guess. What happened? She asked. He stared into the fire a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, as if the words weighed more on their way out. There was an operation, he said. Far from here. City nobody on the news could pronounce right. We were sent to pull some people out who got themselves into the wrong corner at the wrong time. He stopped swallowing, his thumb unconsciously rubbing the scar at his wrist. We got them, he went on. We were almost clear. Then everything went sideways. Wrong alley, wrong timing. Somebody had better aim than they should have. His jaw clenched. One of my guys, Daniel, went down. There was nothing I could do. The room seemed to draw in around the name. "I brought the rest of the team home," Jack said. "Brought the civilians home, but Daniel, he stayed there." He let out a breath that shook just enough for Emily to notice. "I was the one calling the shots. I was the one who picked that alley. I was the one they all followed." "War doesn't care whose fault it is," Emily said softly. "Doesn't stop your head from replaying it," Jack answered. "Night after night doesn't stop you wondering what would have happened if you'd taken the next street over instead." Emily looked at him for a long time, really looked, as if seeing beyond the quiet, steady man who'd pulled over in a storm. "So you came here," she said, "to the middle of nowhere." "Cabin belonged to my uncle," Jack said. "He used it for hunting, left it to me when he passed." He lifted one shoulder slightly. "Out here, it's quiet. Nearest neighbor's 1/2 mile. Nobody asking questions. Nobody needing anything from me." His mouth curved, humorless. At least, that was the idea. "Sorry to ruin that for you," Emily murmured. "You didn't ruin anything," he said. "Storm did. Life did. This is just how it goes." For a moment they sat there, the fire painting soft lines on their faces, two people held together by nothing more than bad weather and the thin thread of shared understanding. "You carry ghosts," she said quietly. "So do you," he answered. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She looked at Lily and Sam, at Noah breathing against her chest. "I just want them to grow up somewhere. The shouting stops," she said. "Somewhere nobody's fists decide how the day is going to go." Jack followed her gaze. The children's faces in the firelight were softer now, no longer pinched with cold and fear, just slack with the kind of sleep only exhaustion can buy. "You did the hardest part," he said. "You walked away." She shook her head. "I walked into a blizzard with 3 kids and no plan. That's not brave. That's desperate." "Sometimes," Jack said, "they're the same thing." Emily let out a breath that sounded a little less like defeat and a little more like release. She leaned her head back against the wall, eyes drifting toward the ceiling beams. "You said we're safe here tonight," she said. "Can you promise me that for one more night after this?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at Coda, at the dog who had once stood between him and men, with rifles, who now lay between a little girl and the rest of the world. He listened to the storm pounding uselessly against the walls. "I can promise you this," he said finally. "As long as you're under this roof, nobody lays a hand on you or those kids. Not without going through me first." She studied him, weighing the words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Then I guess," she said, "for tonight, that's enough." The fire settled into a steady glow. Outside, the wind howled over the pines, sweeping Jack's lonely life up against Emily's battered one, pressing them together under the same fragile roof. 2 ghosts, sitting on opposite sides of the same fire, not knowing yet that the storm that had thrown them into each other's paths was just the first of many. Morning came slowly, like the light itself was reluctant to climb over the mountains. The storm had eased, but the world outside the cabin looked untouched by mercy. Snow drifted high against the porch steps, and the sky hung low and heavy, a pale gray sheet stretched tight over the pines. Inside, the fire had burned low in the night, leaving a deep bed of glowing embers that warmed the room with a soft, steady pulse. Jack woke before the sun, as he always did. Years of military habit didn't loosen easily. He sat up in the armchair, the blanket he'd tossed over himself slipping to the floor. His back ached, the kind of stiffness that came from too many nights spent in places not meant for sleeping. Still, his eyes went first to the children. They were still there, still breathing, still safe. Lily lay curled around her little brother like a shield that had fallen asleep on duty. Sam's face, softer now without the cold tightening his features, pressed against Coda's flank. The dog hadn't moved except to nudge them closer during the night. Noah slept against Emily's chest, tiny hands curled like shells beneath the blanket. Emily herself hadn't slept much. Jack could tell by the faint redness around her eyes, the stiffness in her shoulders. She sat propped against the wall, head tilted slightly forward, as though sleep had snuck up on her and she'd allowed only a few minutes of it. Jack moved quietly. He added wood to the fire, coaxing the flames back to life. When the kettle began to hiss on the stove, Emily stirred. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked softly. Jack turned. "Habit?" "From the Navy?" "Something like that." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around Noah, but keeping her gaze on the fire. She had that faraway look again, the one people wore when they were taking inventory of their own lives and finding too many cracks to fix at once. "I made coffee," Jack said. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." Emily hesitated before accepting the mug he offered. Their fingers almost touched. Almost. She murmured a quiet thank you, and the warmth seemed to bleed into her hands the moment she wrapped them around the ceramic. The kids slowly woke one by one. Sam was first, mumbling something into Coda's fur before sitting up with his hair standing in soft, wild tufts. Lily blinked herself awake next, looking around with confusion that quickly shifted into relief when she realized they were still safe. Jack made oatmeal, simple but filling. The smell alone seemed enough to steady the morning. The kids ate slowly at first, then hungrily, as though their bodies were trying to make up for everything the storm had taken. When breakfast was done, Jack dressed in his heavy coat and boots. Coda stood the moment he saw Jack open the closet by the door. "Where are you going?" Emily asked, her voice tightening with concern. "Just outside," Jack said. "Need to check the road. Make sure the path is clear in case you need to get to town. Won't be long." Emily's eyes narrowed with a mix of fear and something else, responsibility maybe. She looked toward the window, toward the woods beyond it, as though expecting someone to step out from behind the pines. "My kids stay inside?" she asked. Jack nodded. "I'll be right back." He whistled for Coda, who came to his side instantly, tail stiff, posture alert. When Jack opened the door, the cold bit at them sharply, but it was nothing like the previous night. The storm had done its damage and moved on, leaving behind a brittle quiet. Snow reached nearly to Jack's calves as he stepped off the porch. The air held that pure, fresh scent that followed a night storm, clean but heavy, as though the world were catching its breath. He wasn't 20 steps from the cabin before he saw them. Tracks, not just his own from the night before, not the deer prints that crisscrossed the woods regularly. These were tire treads, deep, deliberate, turning directly off the main road and ending only 50 yards from his cabin before looping around and heading back the way they'd come. Jack crouched, brushing a gloved hand over the frozen impressions. They were fresh, last night or early morning. The snowfall hadn't covered them completely yet. Someone had been here. Too close. Coda lowered his head and sniffed, ears pinned forward. The fur along his spine lifted slightly. "Easy," Jack murmured. But his own heartbeat had shifted, settling into that slow, controlled rhythm he recognized from missions long past. The rhythm that told him danger wasn't a possibility, but a certainty waiting to step out of the trees. He followed the tracks a short distance, stopping when the forest thickened. Whoever had driven up here hadn't gotten out of the vehicle. They'd simply come close enough to look. Look for what? Or for who? Emily! Jack's jaw tightened. He returned to the cabin with Coda trotting at his side, the dog glancing back toward the woods every few steps. Inside, Emily was standing, arms tight around herself, baby nestled against her chest. She searched Jack's expression as soon as he walked through the door. "What did you see?" she asked. Jack shook the snow from his shoulders, closing the door behind him. "Tracks." Vehicle pulled off the road last night, close enough to get eyes on the cabin. Emily's face drained of color. She didn't ask who it might have been. She didn't need to. "Mark," she whispered. "He must have realized we ran. He must have—" Jack lifted a hand gently to stop her spiraling. We don't know that, but they both did. A man like Mark didn't let control slip easily, and a woman like Emily didn't get away without someone coming after her. Lily, standing by the hearth, looked between them nervously. "Mom, are we in trouble?" "No, honey," Emily said quickly, forcing a small smile. "No, sweetheart, we're fine." Jack watched the way she soothed her daughter, the way her hand trembled just slightly as she brushed Lily's hair. Fear was a strange thing. It made some people shake, made others sharp. Emily was the kind who went sharp. Fear didn't freeze her, it focused her. "You said you had no plan," Jack said quietly. "But you did. You got your kids out of there. That counts." Emily swallowed hard. "If he finds us—" "He won't," Jack said in that calm, steady tone that didn't promise magic but promised certainty. "Not here. Not today." Her eyes met his, searching his face for something solid to anchor to. Whatever she found seemed to settle her shoulders a bit. But she wasn't the only one unsettled. Jack moved to the window, looking out again at the pristine snow and the faint disappearing tire marks. He rested a hand on the windowsill, absorbing the cold through the pane. He'd spent years learning how to react to things like this, how to anticipate danger, how to track, how to defend, how to build a wall between threat and civilian. What he hadn't expected was that one day, in a quiet cabin in Wyoming, he'd be doing it all over again. This time not for a mission, not for a uniform, but for a woman with bruised wrists and 3 children who had slept peacefully for the first time in who knows how long. Behind him, Noah fussed softly in Emily's arms. Lily and Sam whispered to each other, voices small but hopeful. Coda walked over and pressed his head lightly against Emily's knee. The gesture surprised her, and she let her free hand rest gingerly on the dog's broad head. For the first time, she didn't pull away from being protected. Jack turned from the window. "I'm going to make a call," he said, "just to check in with someone who ought to know what's happening." Emily's breath caught. "The police?" "A sheriff I trust," he said. "She won't make things worse for you. She's one of the good ones." He didn't mention the name yet, didn't mention Daniel, didn't mention the history. That was a bridge he'd cross later. Right now, something else mattered more. The storm outside had faded, but another kind of storm was rolling in, quiet and deliberate, carried on tire tracks buried beneath fresh snow. Jack grabbed his coat, again. Whatever was coming, he wasn't going to let Emily face it alone. He couldn't say why yet. Maybe because no one had been there for her. Maybe because no one had been there for him when he'd been drowning under the weight of his own ghosts. Or maybe, though he wouldn't dare admit it out loud, it was because last night, when she stepped into his truck with those kids pressed close, something in his life shifted, just enough to feel it. A new duty, a new direction, a new storm, the kind a man didn't run from. He opened the door again, and the cold washed over him. Coda was at his side instantly. Emily watched him go, worry tightening her features, but beneath it, beneath all of it, there was a thread of trust forming. Thin, fragile, but real. And in that small cabin in the pines, where the fire glowed and children breathed softly, the first quiet battle lines were drawn against a threat that hadn't yet shown its face. But would soon. By late afternoon, the sky had taken on that pale, muted silver that always came after a winter storm, quiet, watchful, holding its breath. The pines around the cabin stood heavy with snow, branches drooping under the weight. Inside, the fire was steady, the air warm, and for a few precious hours, the world had felt almost safe. Almost. Jack had just hung up his radio call with Sheriff Louise Grant. Her voice, calm and seasoned, had carried a seriousness he recognized. She didn't ask many questions, didn't need to. She said she'd drive out herself, said to sit tight and keep the family close. That alone told him she sensed danger long before he finished explaining why he called. Coda rested by the door now, ears up, body coiled with quiet energy. The dog knew something was shifting. Emily felt it too. She sat on the couch with Noah in her arms, her knees drawn tightly together, her spine stiff, her eyes flicking to the window every few seconds. Lily and Sam played quietly near the table with a set of old wooden blocks Jack had carved years ago, but every loud noise from outside made them freeze. The kind of stillness in the air wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that comes before something breaks. And then, faint at first, but unmistakable, came the low growl of engines. Coda's head snapped toward the sound before Jack even registered it. The dog stood, body tense, a quiet rumble building in his chest. Jack moved to the window. Snow plumed upward along the tree line as two vehicles churned up the narrow path. One was a county sheriff's SUV, the other a black polished pickup, sleek, clean, too well kept for the rugged country around them. Emily saw it a heartbeat after Jack did. Her breath hitched, her grip on Noah tightened. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Mark's truck." The kids instinctively moved closer to her without being told. Lily's small hand found her brother's. Sam's shoulders curled inward, memories of fear waking fresh behind his eyes. Jack's jaw tightened. "Stay inside. Stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't open that door unless I tell you." Emily nodded, but fear had carved lines around her mouth. The engines cut off. For a moment, all was silent except the ticking of cooling metal. Then the pickup door slammed with an authority that felt too loud for the quiet woods. Jack opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, the cold slapping him sharp in the face. Coda trotted out beside him, posture rigid. Snow crunched under boots as two figures approached, the sheriff first, her steps steady, and behind her, Mark Carter. Mark was tall, broad-shouldered, hair slicked back, dressed in a heavy jacket that probably cost more than Jack's entire monthly supply run. His steps were confident in that way men carried themselves when they assumed the world belonged to them. "Afternoon, Mercer," Sheriff Grant called, raising a hand in greeting, but keeping her other hand close to her belt. Her gray eyes were sharp, scanning everything. The woman missed nothing. "Sheriff," Jack replied with a nod. Mark reached the porch, stopping only a foot from Jack. His smile was one of those thin, polished ones, friendly on paper, but edged with something sharp. "You found my family," he said, as if Jack had merely stumbled across a lost glove. "I've been looking for them all night." Jack didn't budge. "Your family was walking in a blizzard with no warm clothes and a baby on the edge of hypothermia." Mark shrugged, hands spreading in a gesture far too casual. "Emily gets confused sometimes, emotional. She takes off without thinking. It's a condition she struggles with." Jack stared at him. The man was lying without even the decency to hide the smirk under it. Sheriff Grant stepped to Jack's side. "Mark says Emily left without warning," she said carefully. "Says she's been under a lot of stress since her husband passed." Jack didn't miss the way she watched Mark's face as she spoke, not believing a word, but letting the man talk himself into a hole. "Is she inside?" Mark asked, leaning slightly to peer through the cabin window. Coda growled low, stepping forward just enough to block his path. Jack planted a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Back," Mark scoffed. "You gonna let your attack dog decide who comes and goes?" "He's trained to read threats," Jack said evenly. "Then maybe he should be looking at the woman inside," Mark snapped. "She took my nieces and nephew in the middle of a storm. She's unwell. I'm here to take them home." Jack didn't step aside. "Sheriff," he said without looking away from Mark, "maybe we should talk inside." But the sound from behind him stopped all movement. A small, sharp gasp. Lily had come to the doorway, unable to stay hidden. She saw Mark and froze, her hand gripping the doorframe so tight her knuckles blanched. Sam peeked from behind her and immediately recoiled, stepping back so quickly he nearly tripped. Emily appeared next, baby held tight, face pale but defiant. Mark's expression twisted. Not concern, not relief, possession. "There you are," he said to her, voice raised as though he were speaking to a misbehaving pet. "Get the kids, we're going home." "No," Emily said, voice trembling but firm. "We're not." Mark barked a laugh. "Honey, don't start. You know you can't handle things on your own. Come on, grab the kids before they embarrass us." Embarrass. Jack felt the word poison the air. Sheriff Grant watched in silence, observing like a judge before passing sentence. Emily shifted Noah higher, standing straighter despite the shaking in her knees. "We're not going anywhere with you." Mark's smile evaporated. His jaw ticked. "We are not doing this in front of strangers." "Funny," Emily said, fingers tightening around the baby. "That's the only time you behave." Mark moved suddenly, stepping forward like he intended to push past Jack into the house. Coda lunged with a bark so loud it seemed to shake snow from the trees. Jack caught the dog's harness, holding him back, but Mark stumbled anyway, shock flashing across his face. "Call off your damn dog!" Mark shouted. "He's doing his job," Jack replied, voice cold as the air around them. Sheriff Grant finally raised a hand. "Everyone back up." Mark turned on her, losing the mask he'd worn so carefully. "Sheriff, this is a family matter. She's unstable. You know how women get when—" "That's enough," Grant snapped. "I'll talk to each of you inside." As she stepped forward, Mark tried to follow her up the porch. But the moment he took another step, Sam cried out. A real terrified cry, the kind pulled from a child who spent too many nights waiting for shouting, for fists, for the sound of a door slamming. Lily grabbed Sam and pulled him back, eyes wide, water bright with fear. That was it. That was all Sheriff Grant needed to see. "Mark Carter," she said sharply, "step back from this porch." He straightened, trying to reclaim the ground he'd lost. "With all due respect, Sheriff." "Step back," she repeated, hand resting on her holster, not threatening, reminding. Slowly, Mark retreated a few feet, jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked. The sheriff turned to Emily. "Ma'am, may I speak with you and the children inside? Mr. Mercer, I'll speak with you next." Emily nodded and stepped aside. For the first time, she opened the cabin door fully, as if letting a law officer see inside was safer than letting Mark see 1 inch past the threshold. Grant stepped in. Mark wasn't allowed to follow. Jack remained on the porch, Coda pressed against his leg, watching Mark the same way he'd once watched hostile targets from behind a crumbling wall, steady, unblinking, assessing. From inside the cabin came muffled voices, the sheriff's. Calm questions, Emily's halting answers, the trembling softness in Lily's explanation, the quiet fear in Sam's. When Sheriff Grant finally emerged, her face had changed. Whatever she heard in that room had scraped away any doubt she'd allowed herself earlier. She turned to Mark. "We're not done," she said, "but you are, for today." Mark stepped forward, livid. "You can't keep them from me." "I can," Grant said, "and I will, until a judge hears this." "This isn't over," Mark hissed, glaring at Jack as though he were the one who'd stolen something from him. "No," Jack said quietly, "it isn't." Mark got back into his shiny black truck, tires spinning angrily in the snow as he sped away, the sound fading down the narrow road like a retreating storm. Sheriff Grant lingered. "I'll file an immediate protective order," she said, her voice steady. and tomorrow morning we're taking this to court. Emily and the kids will need to come with me to Redwood Falls." Emily, standing just behind Jack, nodded slowly. Grant looked between them, eyes lingering on Jack. "You did the right thing calling me. I'll do everything in my power to keep them safe." Her voice softened a fraction. "And Mercer, there's something I need to ask you later, about a name you mentioned. Daniel." Jack's stomach tightened, but he simply nodded. The sheriff walked to her SUV, started the engine, and headed down the snowy lane. When the sound faded, Jack turned back toward the cabin. Emily stood there, shaking, not from cold, but from the crash of adrenaline. Her breath came shallow. Her eyes glistened. "You're safe," Jack said quietly. "Tonight, you're safe." She closed her eyes at that, as if letting herself believe it for the first time. Then she whispered, voice breaking, "For the first time in years, he's gone." Jack didn't touch her, didn't move toward her. But Coda did. The big shepherd stepped up, nudged her hand with warm fur and gentle weight. And for the first time since she'd stumbled through the blizzard, Emily let herself cry. The night passed without further disturbance, but the quiet felt strained, like the world outside the cabin was holding its breath. Morning brought no sunshine, only a dull gray light that filtered weakly through the frosted windows. Snow coated everything in sight, soft and deceptively calm. Inside, the cabin hummed with a restless tension that settled into every corner. Emily barely slept. Jack could see it in the tightness around her eyes, in the way she hovered close to the children as they dressed, as if the warmth of the cabin might evaporate the moment she blinked. Even Lily and Sam seemed unusually still, their voices hushed, their eyes flicking to the door as though expecting it to burst open again. "Sheriff wants us at the courthouse by 10, Jack said, sliding a mug of hot tea onto the table in front of Emily. "It's not far. I'll follow her car in mine." Emily wrapped both hands around the mug, absorbing the heat as though it were the only solid thing anchoring her. "What will they do there?" "They'll listen," Jack said. "They'll ask questions, and they'll put something official in place to keep Mark away." Her breath trembled. "Official doesn't stop a man like him." "Maybe not," Jack said quietly. "But it puts the law on your side. That's a start." The kids finished breakfast slowly. Coda stayed close to them, nudging Sam's shoulder whenever the boy drifted into silence for too long. Lily held Noah while Emily braided her hair, her small hands steady with a seriousness far beyond her age. By the time Sheriff Grant's SUV rumbled up the drive, the children were bundled, the baby fed, and Emily stood at the door with her jaw set in a mixture of fear and resolve. The ride into Redwood Falls was silent, except for the drone of tires on packed snow. Jack followed close behind the sheriff, eyes alert to every car that passed, every unfamiliar vehicle parked on the roadside. Coda sat rigid in the back seat, ears forward, occasionally glancing at the children as if counting them. Redwood Falls wasn't a big place, just a scattering of brick buildings, old storefronts, and a courthouse that stood like the town's aging backbone. Its steps were shoveled clean, but still slick from frost. Sheriff Grant met them at the entrance and gave a small, reassuring nod. "It'll be all right," she murmured to Emily. "Just tell the truth, and let the room see it." Inside, the courthouse felt almost too quiet. The radiators hissed weakly, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Emily held Noah close, Lily and Sam pressed against her sides, Jack standing a respectful distance behind them. Coda lay at his heel, looking more like a disciplined soldier than a household pet. A young woman approached them, a folder tucked under her arm. Her dark hair was braided neatly, and she wore a simple navy suit. She extended her hand with a warm, purposeful confidence. "I'm Mia Lopez," she said, Your legal advocate. Sheriff Grant briefed me. We're going to take care of this, Emily." Emily shook her hand, her grip faint but steady. "Thank you." "We'll go in soon," Mia said. "Before that, I want to ask, do you have any documentation, records, messages, anything from your time in that house?" Emily's shoulders slumped. "Mark smashed my phone 2 months ago. I didn't think to grab anything when we ran." Lily tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom?" she whispered. "What about the little thing?" Emily knelt, eyes softening with confusion. "What thing, sweetheart?" Lily reached inside her coat, then deeper, into the lining. She dug for a moment, and her small fingers emerged holding a tiny flash drive wrapped in a piece of threadbare blue ribbon. Emily's breath caught. "You saved it?" Lily nodded. "You told me to hide it good, in case you needed it." Emily's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with emotion. "Oh, baby, I thought it was lost." Jack stepped closer. "What is it?" "A recording," Emily whispered. "One night when Mark was drinking. He threatened to take the kids. He grabbed me. I managed to record part of it before he realized. I hid the copy before he destroyed my phone." Mia reached for it with both hands, as if handling something sacred. This could change everything. She led them to a small consultation room beside the courtroom. Jack waited outside, leaning against the wall, Coda sitting like a sentinel at his heel. Through the door, he could hear only muffled voices, until suddenly one voice came through clear. Mark's voice. "You think you can take them from me? Those kids are mine, you hear me? Mine. You walk out that door, and I swear—" The recording crackled with static, but the threat was unmistakable, ugly. Then came Emily's gasp, the sound of scuffling, and Lily crying in the background. Jack's jaw hardened. Coda's ears went flat, a deep rumble crawling up from his chest. When Mia opened the door again, her expression had changed, firmer, sharpened by purpose. "This is more than enough," she said. "We're going to win today." Inside the courtroom, Judge Richard Owens presided from the bench, a stern presence with silver hair and deep-set eyes that missed nothing. A few community locals sat scattered in the pews, whispering to each other, their gazes drifting curiously to the unfamiliar faces in the room. Mark arrived minutes later, escorted by a deputy. He wore a pressed shirt and polished boots, hair combed neatly back. But the moment he saw Jack, then Emily, then the children, the mask cracked, just slightly, but enough. Jack noticed. So did Sheriff Grant. Emily's hands trembled as the judge called the session to order. Mia spoke first, outlining Emily's flight through the blizzard, the conditions Jack found them in, the bruises, the fear. Then she played the recording. The room went so still, it felt like time itself had paused. When the recording ended, even the judge sat back slowly, eyebrows raised with the weight of what he'd heard. "Mr. Carter," he said gravely, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Mark's jaw worked furiously. "She's making this sound worse than it was. That recording, it's out of context. She provokes me. She forgets things. She imagines threats that aren't there." Lily whimpered, shrinking back. Sheriff Grant stood. "Your Honor, I visited the Mercer cabin yesterday. The children's reaction to Mr. Carter's presence was immediate and severe. Their fear alone warrants an emergency protection order." Judge Owens nodded once, slowly. "I agree." Mark's face reddened. "This is my family." Owens struck the gavel once. "Not today, it isn't. The court grants full protective custody to Mrs. Emily Carter, effective immediately. Mr. Carter is prohibited from contacting or approaching his sister-in-law or the children within 300 yards. A further hearing will be scheduled to examine additional charges." The tension broke like a fragile thread. Emily let out a breath she'd been holding for years. Lily leaned into her. Sam wrapped an arm around her waist. Noah stirred in her arms, warm and safe. Mark lunged forward a fraction before two deputies caught him by the arms. "This isn't over," he shouted toward Emily, then toward Jack, his eyes burning with a different kind of hatred. "You hear me? This isn't over." Jack didn't move, didn't flinch. Sheriff Grant stepped into Mark's line of sight, blocking his view. "With men like you," she said coldly, "it actually is." The deputies pulled him from the courtroom. The door slammed behind them. Silence settled again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet, one that felt like the first deep breath after nearly drowning. Emily turned to Jack. For a moment, no words came. Her eyes glistened, her lips trembled, her whole face softened in a way he hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking, "for everything." Jack shook his head once. "You did the hard part. You survived him." Coda nudged Lily's hand, tail sweeping gently. The girl let out a breathy giggle, the first sound of uncomplicated happiness Jack had heard from her. And in that moment, in that courtroom with its old wooden floors and faded flags, something shifted. Not just for Emily, not just for the kids, but for Jack too, who suddenly felt for the first time in a long time that maybe he wasn't meant to spend the rest of his life alone in that cabin with ghosts and silence. Outside, the sun finally broke through the dense gray clouds, throwing a pale but honest light across the courthouse steps. It was the first hint of a thaw, and the storm ahead, whatever form it would take, would not be faced alone. The drive back to the cabin was quieter than the drive to town, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Before, the silence had been filled with fear, heavy, pressing, sharp around the edges. Now it felt loose, shaken, a little fragile, but breathing again. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Jack's truck, Noah bundled close to her chest. Her hands were still trembling from the courtroom ordeal, though she tried to hide it. Lily and Sam sat in the back beside Coda, the children leaning against the warm fur as though he were a living wall built solely for their comfort. Jack drove steadily, eyes on the road, but his mind was a storm of unfinished thoughts. Protective order, charges pending, Mark being dragged out of the courtroom, shouting like a cornered animal. Jack had seen men like that before. Men who believed the world owed them obedience. Men who hid their violence behind charm and control. Men who didn't recognize boundaries until they hit one hard enough to break bone. And men like that didn't quit easily. Sheriff Grant's SUV led the way. When they reached the cabin, she stepped out first, brushing snow from her jacket before turning toward Jack. Her expression was thoughtful, not grim, not relieved, something steadier. "You did right by them," she said. Jack nodded once, still scanning the tree line out of habit. Courtroom didn't end him. "No," Grant agreed. "Men like Mark don't fold just because a judge bangs a gavel." Then she exhaled. But it bought Emily time, and sometimes time is the difference between life and disaster. Emily stood just outside the cabin door, listening. The wind blew a strand of hair across her cheek, and she tucked it behind her ear with a trembling hand. "Sheriff," she said, "what happens next?" Grant stepped closer, softening her tone. "You and the kids stay somewhere safe. The judge granted temporary custody, but there'll be more hearings, more evidence, more questions. Mark's going to fight this, though I doubt he'll win." Emily's eyes flickered with a blend of relief and dread. "Where do we stay?" Grant's gaze shifted toward the cabin, toward Jack. "That depends," she said. "You can come with me to the safe lodging in town, but it's crowded, not much privacy, and the kids might struggle there." Her voice lowered. "Or, if Jack's willing, you can stay here for a while." Jack didn't hesitate. "They stay here." Emily's head snapped toward him, her expression startled. Grant's eyes narrowed, reading more than he said aloud. "It's your call, Emily. Not his, not mine. Yours? Emily looked down at Noah, then at Lily and Sam, then finally at Jack, really looked at him, at the steadiness in his posture, the quiet readiness in his eyes, the way Coda guarded the children without needing a word spoken. She swallowed. We'll stay. Something loosened in Jack's chest, something small but unmistakable. Grant nodded. Then I'll check on you daily until this settles. You'll also have a direct line to me if anything feels off. She paused. And Jack? A word before I go. Jack followed her a few steps away from the porch. The wind had picked up a bit, tugging at the brim of Grant's hat. That name you said the other night, she began. Daniel. Jack froze, not visibly, but internally, as though someone had grabbed a wire inside him that hadn't been touched in years. I wasn't sure until today, Grant continued. You said you were his CO. Jack nodded slowly. I was. Grant's eyes softened. My kid brother died under your command. He didn't speak. There were no words he could offer that wouldn't sound like a wound being reopened. You don't have to explain, she added. Believe me, I know the risks better than most. Her mouth twitched into something like a sad smile. He worshipped. You know. Told me once you were the best leader he'd ever had. Jack closed his eyes for a brief second. That quiet, sharp ache in his chest returned. The one he'd carried like a hidden bruise since the day he came home with one fewer man than he'd deployed with. He deserved better, Jack said. A better ally, a better decision, a better leader. Grant shook her head firmly. War kills good men every day. Daniel made his choice, same as you did. Don't rewrite the past to blame yourself for what the enemy did. Jack didn't argue. He couldn't. Not convincingly. But her words settled somewhere deep, where guilt had been sitting like ice for too long. You're doing good work here, Grant said finally, nodding toward the cabin. Daniel would have been proud of that. She left without waiting for him to respond. When Jack returned to the porch, Emily was watching him with a softness he hadn't seen before. Not pity, not curiosity, but understanding. The kind that forms only when one wounded soul recognizes another. Inside the cabin, life resumed in fragile, hesitant ways. Jack made lunch while Emily tended to Noah. Lily helped Sam build a crooked wooden tower, their laughter tentative at first, then freer as the afternoon wore on. Each sound seemed to warm the cabin more than the fire did. Later, when the kids napped and the winter sun dipped behind the mountains, Jack stepped outside to chop more firewood. The cold bit at his hands, but the rhythm grounded him. Swing, crack, split. Each log became a task he could finish, a piece of control he could hold. Emily watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, coat drawn tight. You don't have to do all that alone, she said quietly. Jack set another log on the stump. Been doing it alone for years. I can help, she said. With an axe? His brow lifted, halfway to teasing. With something, she said, and the smile she gave him was small, but real. I want to earn my place here, not feel like a burden. You're not a burden. You don't even know us. Jack paused mid-swing, then lowered the axe. For a moment, the crisp winter air felt warmer. I know enough, he said. I know you kept your kids alive in a storm. I know you fought to protect them when no one else would. That's more than plenty. Emily looked away, blinking quickly. And I know where you're at, Jack added. Because I've been there, maybe not the same way, but close enough. She stepped down onto the snow-dusted porch, boots crunching softly. You think we'll get through this? He looked at her. Really looked. The bruises, the exhaustion, the fear that still tightened her shoulders. But also the strength, the grit, the stubborn will that had carried 3 children through a blizzard. We will, Jack said simply. All of us. Behind them, Coda came bounding out of the cabin, barking once as if to second the poem, promise. Lily followed him out, giggling as the dog nudged her. Sam came next, tripping over his own boots but catching himself on the porch rail. Emily laughed softly at the sight. It was the first time Jack heard her sound like a woman who remembered joy. The sun dipped lower, tinting the snow with a faint gold. It was the kind of light that didn't last long, but while it did, it felt like hope. Emily glanced at Jack again, and her voice softened. You've already done so much for us. Why? Jack thought about the question, then about Daniel, about the cabin that had been silent too long, about the way Lily had smiled at Coda for the first time, the way Sam now slept without flinching at every sound, the way Emily had straightened her back in that courtroom even when her hands betrayed her fear. Because somebody ought to, he said finally. And I can. Emily exhaled, a shaky breath that carried both gratitude and something deeper, something that could grow if it had enough time and enough safety. The cold air curled between them like a ribbon. Coda nosed into Jack's palm, then into Emily's, as though binding them both to some unspoken pact. The day faded into evening, the sky bruising into shades of violet and navy. Jack started a new fire inside the cabin while the children helped Emily fold blankets and gather toys. Noah slept peacefully in his cradle, another small miracle in a string of long, hard days. Before turning in for the night, Emily stood in the doorway of her room, looking toward Jack where he tended the fire. You promise we're safe here? She asked. Jack didn't turn. He didn't need to. Yeah, he said softly. I promise. And this time Emily believed him, not because she wanted to, but because something in his voice made it impossible not to. Outside, the world lay covered in snow, but inside the cabin, a new kind of warmth was beginning to take root. Quiet, steady, fragile, and real. The kind of warmth that changes everything. Winter loosened its grip on the mountains, one slow day at a time. The heavy snows that once buried the pines now thinned into patches, retreating into the shadows. The light grew stronger, mornings brighter, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily stepped out onto the porch and felt something other than fear waiting in the air. It had been nearly 2 months since the court hearing, 2 months of quiet days and long evenings, the kind of peace she once believed was reserved for other people. For people whose lives hadn't been cracked open by fists and threats and cold nights lying awake, listening for footsteps in the hall. But peace was a funny thing. It didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, through the sound of children's laughter returning, through the steadiness of a man who didn't raise his voice or his hand, through the gentleness of a dog who seemed to understand hurt better than most people did. Inside the cabin, life had begun to feel ordinary. And ordinary for Emily was the sweetest miracle. Jack had built the kids a little room along the back wall of the cabin. 4 walls made from pine he'd milled himself, a window that looked out into the trees, and shelves he carved where Lily stored the treasures she found on her walks, smooth stones, pine cones, the occasional bit of quartz. Sam proudly kept his drawings pinned above his bunk, crooked pictures of Coda, of the cabin, of Emily holding baby Noah. As for Coda, he'd appointed himself guardian of the entire household. He slept by the children's door each night, rose whenever Noah cried, and went absolutely everywhere Lily went, as if the girl had become the center of his compass. And Jack had changed too, not in dramatic ways, not in ways he spoke about. But Emily saw it in the way he stood a little straighter now, in the way he shaved more regularly, in the moments he caught himself smiling when he didn't mean to. She saw it in the way he watched the children when he thought no one was looking, as though trying to memorize something he feared might disappear. She saw it most of all in how he watched her, respectfully, quietly. With a kind of careful hope, neither of them dared speak aloud. But the world doesn't give gifts without testing the hands that reach for them. One late afternoon, the sun sinking gold beyond the trees, Jack found Emily standing near the garden bed he'd helped her turn over for spring planting. She held one of Sam's little jackets, freshly washed, and was pinching it from the line when she froze. Snow had melted almost completely from the yard, mud and grass showed through, and right there, plain as a signature written in dirt, were footprints leading from the road toward the trees. Heavy ones. Boot prints. Fresh. Jack saw them the same instant Emily did. He didn't tell her not to worry. Lies were useless things between people who'd seen danger up close. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice steady. "Inside," he said. Emily didn't question him. She moved quickly, ushering Lily and Sam through the door and clutching Noah to her chest. Coda followed them in, hackles raised, mouth tight. Jack studied the prints a moment longer. They led toward the cabin, stopped near the woodpile, then doubled back. Someone had come close enough to watch, to listen, to weigh the odds, but had left again. He didn't need a name to go with the tracks. His body already recognized the threat the way a seasoned soldier recognizes the sound of a familiar weapon. Mark hadn't let go. Not really. Inside, Emily's voice trembled. "I thought the court—" "Papers don't stop a man like him," Jack said quietly. "But they give us leverage." "So what do?" Her voice cracked. Jack looked at her, really looked, at the fear she tried so hard to hide from her children, the exhaustion she carried like a shadow. Then he said, "We don't run anymore." That night, Sheriff Grant arrived within an hour. She listened, jaw tight, examining the evidence with practiced eyes. "He's testing boundaries," she said, "seeing if he can scare you into making a mistake. We're not giving him that chance." She arranged for extra patrols on the road leading toward the cabin. She installed a motion sensor by the porch, and before leaving, she turned to Jack. "You keep doing what you're doing," she said softly. "She trusts you. The kids trust you. Don't underestimate what that means." Emily didn't sleep much that night. Jack didn't either. Coda lay in front of the door, rigid and alert, but morning came, and with it, the beginning of spring. Life didn't stop for fear. It never had. So Emily woke the children, made breakfast, tied Lily's shoelaces, wiped oatmeal from Sam's chin, and rocked Noah through his morning fuss. Jack chopped more wood, repaired the hinge on the barn door, and guided the children through their new chores, teaching them how to help stack kindling and recognize animal tracks. There were quiet moments now, moments that felt almost fragile. One of them happened the following Sunday. Emily, wearing a simple blue dress and a shawl borrowed from Mrs. Harper, stepped out of the cabin holding Noah, while Lily and Sam ran ahead, Coda trotting between them like a guardian angel on 4 legs. Jack, freshly shaven and awkward in a clean flannel shirt, fell into step beside her. Pastor Jim had invited them to a small blessing ceremony behind the church. Not a wedding, nothing formal, nothing that demanded anything from either of them except presence. But as they approached the handful of neighbors who'd gathered, Mrs. Harper with her kind eyes, Mia with her stack of children's books for Sam and Lily, Sheriff Grant standing quietly at the back, Emily felt her throat tighten. These were people who had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away. People who had stepped forward when she expected the world to keep stepping back. Pastor Jim raised his hands as the small group formed a circle. "Some families," he said gently, "are born. Some are built, and some are found on cold nights when strangers become shelter." Emily felt her eyes burn. Jack looked down at Lily, who had wrapped her small fingers around his hand without asking permission. Sam clung to his other side, face bright with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Noah reached for Jack's shirt. And Emily. Emily looked at the man who had pulled over on a frozen highway and changed every corner of her story. Pastor Jim nodded for Jack to speak if he had anything to say. Jack exhaled, steadying himself in a way he hadn't needed to steady himself since the Navy. "I'm not a man who talks easy," he began, rubbing his thumb lightly across the back of Sam's hand. "But I know what it means to lose things, to lose people, to lose yourself." He paused, eyes drifting toward Emily. "And I know what it means when life gives you one more chance to do something right." Coda barked once, as if punctuating the moment. Jack smiled faintly. "I can't promise life won't bring storms, but I can promise this: I'll stand with you in every one of them. You and these kids will never have to walk alone again." Emily didn't try to blink back the tears this time. They fell freely, warm on her cheeks, washing some last piece of the past away. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. "And I promise not to run any more. Not from life, not from hope, and not from you." The children closed the distance, huddling around them. Lily slipped her hand into Emily's. Sam rested his head on Jack's hip. Noah reached up, fingers brushing Jack's chin. Pastor Jim lowered his head, offering a gentle blessing over them all. Sheriff Grant watched quietly, her face softened by a rare smile. Mia dabbed at her eyes. Mrs. Harper blew her nose with a flourish. It wasn't a grand wedding. It wasn't meant to be. It was a beginning, a simple, sacred beginning. Later that afternoon, back at the cabin, Emily stood on the porch as the last light of day stretched across the valley like a warm hand. Jack stepped beside her, Coda settling heavily at their feet. "You know," Emily said softly, "I used to think storms came to punish, to strip everything away." Jack looked at her, the wind brushing her hair just enough to move it from her cheek. "And now?" She turned toward him, her smile tender, steady. "Now I think storms come to clear a path." Jack took her hand, thumb brushing across her knuckles, and for the first time in years, he felt something break loose inside him, something cold that had lived there far too long. The cabin windows glowed warm behind them. Inside, Lily and Sam were drawing, Noah babbling softly, their laughter rising like sparks from a fire. Together, Jack and Emily watched as the last of winter melted into spring. And for the first time since the blizzard that nearly swallowed them whole, the world felt wide open, not empty, not dangerous, but full of roads leading somewhere worth going, as long as they walked them together. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, just drop a simple 1 in the comments. If you want more stories like this, leave a 0. Your comments help this little channel keep growing, and they tell me you'd like to see the next chapter of courage, kindness, and second chances. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. There are many more stories waiting, stories of hope, healing, and the unexpected heroes who walk among us. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.